Imagine slamming down on Ultra Rhulk, but not even knowing that he skinned his mommy. Crushing Nezarec, but being ignorant of all the scions that were murdered for him. Or even nuking Callus, and not feeling sorry for the guy who just loved to chow down on poisons daily. This video will give you all the rich histories of evil Chad-level psychopaths that we barely scratch the surface of. I'll dive into lore, gore, and secrets of the most depraved and fun bosses we've killed, and surprise you with some raid and GM boss lore that you never knew existed. So, let's go. There aren't many that have earned the title of Psycho Boss like Rhulk. For me, once you swim into a prison, diss the jailer, beat him with his very own rib, and strut out with the biggest mother of all the worm gods in tow, then turn her into a massive battery for your gun, you're a serious boss level. Rhulk was an ultra who was only bested by us the Guardians, due to his own arrogance, not considering us until the very end an actual threat in the Vowed Disciple raid, and he paid for that with his own life. Confirmed by Bungie, he is, hands down, the strongest raid boss we have ever encountered until, of course, the witness made himself known. A young Rhulk would pick apart pets and watch the kids cry about it, unconnected. This usually is a good indicator that things ain't gonna turn out well for this guy. The witness, who comes on a bit later, saw the rage potential of Rhulk really early on and groomed him for billions of years until he was ready to enact the great species elimination and cut all connection with his family and race in the most bloody way. Rhulk's bloodlust led him to turn his mother into a Lubraean skin suit and separate his dad's head from his dad's body. Perverting the gift of the Traveler, he turned it against his own people and tore his planet Lubrae apart using the very power of their own Saphiric sun. In fact, it was this power that he turned into the Upended, which drew power itself from Zeta the Worm Mother to cause great destruction from inside his own pyramid. The first disciple of the Witness would carry out his master's plans for what seemed like billions of years, but he saw himself as an equal to the Witness, even though he was not really fully aware of the entire plan of the final shape. He was himself deceived, and then trapped, trying to groom Savathûn for years inside her own throne world. Secretly, holding great powers locked away in Rhulk's own vault. But I'll talk about Oryx later as well. The most surprising thing I think I've learned about Rhulk is his emotional journey and the single connection in cultivating a disciple of his own from a insectoid race that he would eventually come to exterminate. He took time and care to raise his one and only disciple up from nothing, and will ultimately grieve him when he had to put him down as just another disappointment. Lubraean glaives were a rite of passage for the Witness's disciples, and he gifted them to all the disciples, even secret disciples, except for Callus, as by that time Rhulk had been defeated. But I would ask whether Rhulk would have given one of these great power emblems to the pawn that Callus had become in the Witness's grand plans. As it stands, the only Lubraean thing to survive to this day is the Upended and the glaives. Incepted nightmares and blood sacrifice were core tenets to another disciple of the Witness, who ruled through pain and resurrection. Secret god to a cult of fanatic scions dedicated to bring him back to life is Nezarec, final god of pain. In the Root of Nightmares, we're properly introduced to the flesh and blood Nezarec after some long edging by Bungie. Nezi is the core blueprint for Tormentors within the Witness's personal army, the Dread, who in turn used a Rhulk template as a guide, but fusing different species together, combining light and dark inside the Traveler. A chimeric fusion of parts. After he became a disciple of the Witness, Nezi, we will probably never know his original form. You could describe Nezarec as the greatest marketeer of the disciples who cultivated and exploited a living legacy that sustained even beyond his own death. A hidden cult of scions would continue to honour Nezarec in modern times, offering up individuals with particularly powerful psychic abilities as sacrifices to him. One such unfortunate person was the partner of a powerful scion who was taken from his home and tortured by the cult in order to feed Nezarec hunger for pain and fear. Nezarec's influence was working its magic on humanity well before the Golden Age, having formed their own cult, deciding to worship him. He was the subject of a pre-Golden Age text titled Of Hated Nezarec, leather-bound book containing apocrypha of the disciple which survived in the possession of a human family into the Golden Age and post-collapse eras. The Harmony spent about 50 years waging war with the Hive. It would be a war that he would never win, but it was during the time they turned to the super unpredictable power of dragon wishes as a weapon to use against the aggressors. The Ascendant Realm housed the great battles that saw the Wish Bishops tear through Xivu Arath's forces, and for a time, a stalemate was met. This might be the first encounter that we know of, that the forces of the Witness encountered the Ahamkara and their abilities aligned with the power of the Traveller as the Harmony were. This is as good a theory as we have as to why Ahamkara were part of the Strike liminality, intermingled with the memory of the Precursor people city that we encounter in the latter half of that mission. The main mechanics of that Grandmaster lay in empowering the Ahamkara bones with taken energy, which is a nice touch, even if there's no mention of how this works in any lore, that I've read anyway, and less on the main Tormentor in the boss room, Taxia, the four-thumbed Tormentor of the Ahamkara, and who also has a crit spot on her back, so you and your teammates can pop away while you run away from this aggro Nezarec clone. Tormentors, in my opinion, are the most intimidating of the lot, as they charge straight at you, swinging that monster-sized darkness scythe. You turn and you run out of there. If you didn't think Marasov has a perverse sense of humour, then you should check out the actual heart of Riven that sits on her desk to this very day. Imprisoned and subjugated by Mara for most of her Ahamkara life, Riven played the part of a trickster beautifully, and towards the end of her physical life, the role of mother, taken by Oryx using the power of the deep. In the history of Destiny, there's only ever been 3 that have retained a portion of their free will, and Riven of 1,000 Voices is one of them. As with most Ultras, Riven, the final boss of the Last Wish, didn't really stay dead for too long, but she was our first introduction to the Ahamkara and their trickster wishes. We've only seen Riven in her many-eyed, tentacled self, but an adept shapeshifter who could take any shape she wished. In fact, when Uldren Saw presented Riven to Mara, she sat in the palm of Uldren's hand. She also has been seen as a needle-nosed basilisk. Like Savathun, she provided big boss energy and always kept us guessing, not knowing what she was going to throw at us during Last Wish, and of course during the Season of the Wish. Since death is just another state of being for worm gods and wish dragons, we can probably imagine that we are never done with Riven in some guise or another. Has an entire civilization ever committed mass carnage, suicide, and sacrifice as profound as that of the Witness? Cleaved bodies, untold death, and ritualistic gathering of consciousness separate from the physical self, gathered into one being of unmatched paracausal potential, hell-bent on a singular vision for all things to reach a perfect state, a final shape. The Witness was the grand architect of the downfall of the uncountable races and civilizations over their billions of years of existence, utilizing the grand power of darkness. This single entity empowered many of its disciples to enact the great plan to solidify all living things into one final shape, one point where all pain and suffering would end and break the eternal circle that all life seems to follow. It was the greatest wielder of darkness and could move entire planets between realities and tear the very walls of time. The greatest power of the Witness ever held was the power of fear. Every disciple, subordinate, and race that encountered the great being cowered and feared their wrath upon failure. The great raid bosses we have talked about earlier, like Rhulk, Nezarec, and Savathun to come, expressed their great fear of the Witness's retribution over failure and deviance from the great Final Shape plan. Jealously protective of the power of darkness, many other species were violently removed from existence when discovered that they wielded that power. It was civilizations such as the Noesis, the Ecumene, and the Kugu who previously used the power for peaceful purposes but were burnt out of all history using the influence of the Witness. The reverence that was held for the darkness did not extend to the light, as this power was looked upon as the great counter-evil that spread only chaos and havoc, leading many civilizations to ruin, because no guidance was ever given by the traveller, no purpose transferred. The Witness was the largest and final boss we would ever face in a raid during the Light and Dark saga. The raid stands as the toughest day 1 raid to ever be released, and I remember watching Aztecross do a 2-day after the contest mode started, still battling away on that third encounter. All I could think was like how epic it was that one raid would hold such a grasp on like all of these creators that they would deprive themselves of sleep, sanity, and comfort to get to a finish on this monstrous raid. The true origin and purpose of the Traveller, it seems, will never be revealed to us, that I can see anyway. But there is one character that has held that knowledge to ransom over many years, but now is gone for good. And his name was Grand Emperor Callus of the Cabal Empire. He also claimed to know a greater power that exists than the Traveller, but never revealed that to us also. Whether that is the Witness, who knows? Vain, power-hungry narcissist of the Cabal, Callus was a contradiction of terms and traits. Loving, yet lethal, who did show affection for his subordinates. One of the few characters to continue on beyond their own raid, Callus, was the boss of Leviathan. The very first raid of Destiny 2 had the most puzzles and the least amount of bosses out of any raid to date, and only one boss throughout the entire raid. In Leviathan, we fight a robotic version of Callus, since he had apparently undergone profound physical changes. He's known to have ingested exotic and severely dangerous substances like liquid helium-4, pure neutronium, which would instantly kill any normal biological being. He stopped appearing in the flesh, instead making exclusive use of his robotic proxies when appearing in public until his ascendance to become the very, very expendable disciple of the Witness. As the final boss of Lightfall, we also never got to experience a hidden ability of Callus, who it is said could pull anyone into a powerful mind prison, a gift he received from the Scion Council. The mind prison is similar to a kind of ascendant realm, making him quite a deadly foe to deal with. I mean, this isn't the first time we've warred in his mindscape, and we probably won't be the last. Guardians first encountered a mindscape when they faced the exiled Emperor Callus in his throne room on the Leviathan, also called his Nightmare Realm. The Emperor created this space by connecting with the psychic concert of his counselors and used it to torture and detain his foes. In our first encounter within the derelict Leviathan, in the orbit of the moon, Eris Morn would find a large concentration of psychic energy, and setting up a containment field, she managed to project our Guardian Fire team right into it, so they could glean knowledge of Callus's plan from his fractured mind. Season of the Risen saw the return of the Mindscape, as the powerful Scions dragged a weakened Ulnath Light Cleanser, that's a Hive Lightbearer Knight Lieutenant, who ran an operation to stockpile and purify light for the Lucent Brood, into this space so we could sever their connection to the light and leave them in suspended animation for further psychic analysis. In our gems, we meet some underhanded and psychotic Cabal that we never get a good chance to learn about, like the Guardian Butcher of the Red War and the Cabal we face down in one of the newer Grandmaster Nightfalls, Commander Drakus of Battleground Behemoth. This is one nasty commander who didn't know loyalty, didn't understand respect, and is a stain on the honour of Empress Keitel's right of proving. Serving as a legionary during the Red War under Dominus Gaul, he became known as a butcher for the numerous count of lightless guardians he had maliciously taken out during the war effort. After Gaul's defeat, Drakus went onwards to create a name for himself and became known amongst the Red Legion's remnants as a warlord, achieving for himself the rank of commander. Stationed on Nessus in the aftermath, he regularly went on hunts for the timid, native, innocent Batactals in the area to provide entertainment and some sport for him and his Cabal under him. We encounter him as he is stationed defending the Imperial land tank, Helphus Electus, in Watcher's Grave, as it chews up the planet's landscape, refining resources for Cabal weapons and armour. Also, in the arms dealer strike, we go head to head with the beefy, passively shielded Brachiosan in the GM version, who is the arrogant mercenary arms merchant to the Red Legion. Zan himself, as an infamous arms dealer, was most loyal to whomever was paying him for his experimental weaponry, and his preference was to employ criminals and mercenaries since he understood their motivations. Not leaving the Eliksni out of the pantheon of mentalists, there is Phyrus, who was a hollowed out shell of what she once was. A revered sharpshooter of House Salvation and a close friend of Hermes, she was reincarnated as a Scorn by the Witness. As a general in the service of the Witness, Phyrus was presented to Hermes as a gift by the Witness, and this left Hermes shocked by what now was once Phyrus, a zombie in every effect and not a trace of her once friend. Horrified by what had become of her friend, Hermes reached out and grazed the monstrosity's face, hoping to find any sign of the Eliksni she was. This only prompted her to bite the ship stealer's arm, who was glad that it gave her a reason to scream aside from just the anguish. She would now be known as once Phyrus, the exhumed Tether, the powerful Scorn Raider and lost captain of the fallen House of Salvation. She was deployed in the assault on the lunar vault housing the submind Malhayati, where she was used as a tether between it and the high forces of Xivu Arath trying to corrupt the submind. Another confidant of Hermes was an Eliksni that during the conversion between Eliksni and Exo pulled her own face off to prove that it was just a simple mask of a former life she could easily shed. She also ordered others to walk around and wear her own face to further prove that it didn't represent who she is. She was the very first Eliksni to go through the process to become an Exo, and was a pretty unique boss encounter. In fact, if you have ever used the Mask of Bacchus, Exotic, you might have not known that this armor piece is based on the actual face of Atrax, that she discarded, and Bacchus, the fallen captain, took it off her discarded body to use herself. Deepstone Crypt and Vesper's Host brings us face to face, kinda, with Atrax, albeit Vespers is in a disused clone exobody of Atrax, and not the one we fight in Deepstone Crypt. Granted, the final boss of Deepstone was Tanix, the Abomination, who at that point was Machine and Eliksni, but not in Exo form. Bound to a floating chair and armed with warheads, he proved a good opponent for the Guardian, but nothing that memorable. He only stands out, really, since he murdered the Hunter Vanguard Andal Brask before Kate 6 took up the title. We've managed to face Tanix 3 times so far in game. It's hard to apply the title of psychopathic to the Vex as cold, calculated directives of a collective that consumes all, then moves on, seems problematic. But Atheon, Time's Conflux, stands out as a boss that wanted to remove the Guardian from the very sense of existence. Atheon was a massive Vex Minotaur that was the big guard dog of the Vault of Glass on Venus. Atheon could control the very flow of time within the Vault of Glass, a reprised raid from Destiny 1. He could send the Guardian to the past, future, and spaces without time, all within the Vault. Time was his weapon, and Atheon's principal weapon to divide and conquer these entering into the Vault. In a way, that Vault was Atheon's throne world of sorts. The fun-loving team of Praedyth, Panin, and Caber would fight armies of Ahamkara while rocking out to classic Earth tunes, and were the original team sent into the Vault, and it would be their actions that would eventually help us to defeat the Minotaur at the end of that raid. Guardian Kabir, who famously loved to drink some delicious radiolaria, programmed the fate-defying Aegis with his light and the intent of protecting future Guardians from the Vex Mind's powers. It was thought the entire team was lost and expunged from the very moment of time, but in episode Echoes we do get mention of Praedyth, an original team member who now wanders around the Vexnet, maybe to return. As is the norm for Guardians, eventually we turn some of Atheon into a weapon to use, as its eye was later retrieved after the battle and delivered to Maya Sundaresh's wannabe Lakshmi II of the future war cult for analysis during a quest investigating time ripples that would yield us No Time to Explain. Vex's ability to simulate possible futures has been part of many storylines, from the faction wars to the Endless Night, and even episode Echoes underpins this possibility that it will even get more pronounced in stories to come. In the history of raids, Oryx was the only one to set and literally grow the stage for the raid location we were to run through. The size of a small moon, the Dreadnought became the mobile throne world retreat for the king god of the Hive. Oryx took great care to grow his paracausal entity to the size it is now over billions of years with the help of other worm gods. The hull was stitched with pieces of the carcass of Akka, the slain god of secrets, which was then covered by hammer and scalpels of Savathun and Xivu Arath as plated armour, making the ship near invulnerable to even paracausal attacks, unkillable, impregnable, and impressively vast. This is a beautiful set piece for the King's Fall raid. Oryx was the ultimate driving force for the growth of the Hive as conquering force in the universe for many eons. The constant expansion of the Empire was solely to satiate the endless hunger for violence of their worm larvae, who needed it more and more in unending demand. This proved a huge problem for the Hive gods, but it was Oryx who designed the ultimate paracausal pyramid scheme of tides, using the rank of the Hive to keep the worms satiated. Crota, the Eater of Hope, was one of the biggest disappointments of Oryx, and the main reason he came to the Sol system to avenge his slain son in the Taken King. Children were Oryx's system of protection and security that ultimately became his downfall as they tried to live up to the legacy of the King of the Hive gods. It seems Oryx harboured no great love for his son, as naming him Crota translates to a woman or person of scarce resource that lacks work, housing, and food often. When your dad picks you up by the foot and launches you into a domain ruled by billions of robotic collective minds, you know you kind of might have fucked up somewhere. Crota spent decades in the Vexnet, learning to toughen up and build his own legacy, all to eventually move away from that Nepo baby title he had earned. He would make a mark in history in his decisive victory on the moon, by taking many, many Guardian lives and literally scarring the surface of the moon with the cleaves of Crota's blades. In fact, Crota has one of the highest kill counts of any enemy humanity has fought, and he killed thousands during that battle and set the Vanguard back for many years. Even though we've never faced Xivu Arath directly, I think she does deserve a mention. The youngest sister of the Hive God Trio, she always looked up to Oryx, and we see this clearly in Heresy. She followed his lead where it came to sword logic and domination, and even stoking great wars throughout the universe. The more loving of the original sisters, she would mourn and lament on the death of her brother Oryx, and would face emotional devastation that the Guardian never picked up the mantle of the Taken King. She now stands at odds, and angry at the betrayal of her god sister, also for defecting to the light. Savathun doesn't win fights. She steals them before they even begin. When Oryx first carved his way into the deep, she saw what he could become and poisoned his throne world with trickery, forcing him to seek her advice before every move. When her brother killed Akka, the worm god of secrets, she was right there to steal its knowledge and twist it into her own power. Even her own death was a scam. She let us kill her on purpose, knowing that the light would resurrect her in a perfect, purified body, free from the chains of the worm gods. Her deception isn't just strategy, it's a fundamental weapon. When the Black Fleet arrived in Seoul, she didn't resist like Xivu. She pretended to serve the witness, only to betray it at the last second and escape with forbidden knowledge. An absolute fan favourite and maybe standout villain of a DLC character, I think she stands as an S-tier legend we love to hate, and again love. Some would argue even above Rhulk, as she is still alive and kicking.